Locked in a cold glass cell, deemed unfixable, until a human touched her and changed everything. Time doesn't pass in space, it decays. And somewhere between the flickering consoles, the filtered air, and the cold hum of an orbital cell block, it had long since rotted into silence. Commander Dax Halloran stood alone in Observation Room Delta, a thermal mug cooling beside his elbow, and a dozen muted security feeds scrolling across the wall. He wasn't watching most of them, just one, Cell 14A. The alien inside didn't move. She hadn't for hours, days maybe, no blinking, no twitch. A statue carved from olive stone, with long silver-white hair cascading over her shoulders like snowfall on moss. She sat cross-legged in the center of the cell, hands resting palms up on her knees, the kind of posture that screamed stillness, not peace. Dax leaned forward, elbows on the console. Elin, he murmured, reading her nameplate again. No surname, just a designation. Thalrian female, high intelligence. Captured during the collapse on Tyrat's third moon. Once a tactician, now reduced to a security anomaly. He'd heard what the staff said. Doesn't speak, doesn't move, doesn't matter. To them, she was just a broken relic from a war no one wanted to remember. A failed interrogation subject. A woman whose silence had lasted 6 years without slipping once. But tonight, something was different. There was no data to explain it. No alarms, no movement logs. Just a feeling. The kind Dax had learned not to ignore after 17 years of battlefield instinct. He watched her stillness like prey studies the grass for the twitch of a predator's tail. Not fear, respect. The calm wasn't empty. It was waiting. The lights dimmed overhead, sinking to the station's night cycle. Soft blue glow bled into the floor tiles, turning the sterile white cell into something ghostly. Her green skin seemed to deepen in the cool light, lips slightly parted, breath soft but steady, perfect control. Then it happened, barely noticeable. A twitch in the left eye. The smallest flick of focus. She was watching the camera, not glancing, watching. Dax's breath stilled. A slow, crawling realization ran up his spine. She sees me. He sat back. The chair hissed under his weight, the metal frame protesting after too many hours. His hand brushed the edge of the console, where his unfinished meal bar sat unopened. He hadn't eaten since noon. He didn't remember feeling hungry. Outside, the faint rumble of docking clamps echoed through the bulkheads. A cargo freighter arriving for parts exchange. Routine. Except this time, it wasn't. His datapad buzzed. Confirmation. Trade Order 672-G executed. Unit 14. A to be exchanged for damaged reactor core. Pickup scheduled at 0600. He stared at the message for a long time, like looking would change the meaning. It was done. She was being traded. 6 years of silence, and this was how it ended. Not with a hearing, not with a decision, but as a side note in a maintenance report. Someone had filed a requisition. Parts were needed. A cracked fusion coil came cheaper if you threw in a prisoner no one cared about. The scavenger would arrive in the morning, take her away. She wouldn't make it another year in pirate hands. Everyone knew that. Dax rubbed his eyes, the heel of his palm digging into the scar that cut across his right brow. An old wound. One of many. He'd seen too many people thrown away in the name of efficiency. Elin was just another casualty in the system's eyes. But he couldn't look away. Why her? He muttered under his breath, the words hot with frustration. Why do you care? He told himself it was protocol. That he was just doing his job. That maybe somewhere in all this, there was a loophole. But deep down, he knew better. It wasn't justice pulling at him, it was memory. He'd seen someone else shut down like that once, years ago. A fellow officer, his sister, a flash burn survivor who never spoke again. The look in her eyes, trapped behind silence, behind trauma, was the same look Elin wore now. And he hadn't saved her. He stood suddenly, jaw clenched, heart hammering. There was a loophole. Protocol 7/9, wartime-dependent reclamation. Rarely used, practically forgotten. It allowed command personnel to claim a non-combatant alien as a protected dependent under direct care, provided psychological or humanitarian risk. It hadn't been enforced in over a decade, but it was still legal, still real. Dax moved to the console and pulled up the clause. His fingers flew across the keys, typing the override manually. No shortcuts, no AI assistance. That would flag the action. He had to do it old school, quietly. Each screen lit up with warnings. Multiple authorizations required, delay risk, chain of command breach. But he kept going. Outside, the hallway was silent. The lights flickered, standard energy cycle balancing, nothing new. And yet the air felt tighter, like the walls were listening. He returned to the feed. Elin hadn't moved. But the silence was different now, dense, expectant. His breath fogged slightly on the glass of the monitor. He hadn't noticed how cold the room had gotten, environmental regulation lag, or maybe just the pressure of choice. He leaned closer, and then, again, her gaze shifted. This time there was no mistaking it. Her eyes locked onto the camera. No drifting, no hesitation, director, personal. He froze. She wasn't just seeing the lens, she was seeing him, her head tilted ever so slightly. One lock of white hair slid across her cheek, her lips parted, barely. And in that exact moment, Dax felt something shift inside him. Not pity, recognition. She was telling him something, with her eyes, her stillness, her silence. I know what you're about to do. Do it, or don't, but choose. The buzzer on the wall counted down another hour. 0432. Less than 2 hours before she was gone. Less than 2 hours before he let them take her. Dax swallowed hard, throat dry. The tea in his mug had gone cold, the meal untouched. His fingers hovered above the final confirmation key. Claim her, risk everything, his career, his position, his freedom. But maybe, just maybe, give her hers back. And that was enough. He hit the button. Claim initiated. Protocol 7/9. The system beeped. Authorization pending. Approval required. Dax stood in the silence, staring at the screen as Elin's eyes bored into him. She hadn't spoken a word, but for the first time she had answered. And for the first time, Dax didn't feel like a commander monitoring a cell. He felt like a witness, and witnesses eventually do one of two things. They turn away, or they act. He turned toward the door. 4,438 hours. Orbital cycle dusk, temperature, holding at 17.2 degrees Celsius. Pressure, stable. Commander Dax Halloran's boots struck the floor with unhurried certainty as he walked the length of Corridor 7K. The override authorization flickering on his datapad like a live wire. One signature, one risk, and now, one countdown. He hadn't slept. Not since Elin looked into that camera. Not since he'd felt, without a single word, someone ask him for something she hadn't asked of anyone in 6 years. Believe me. The doors ahead loomed open as he passed through biometric clearance. Engineering Bay Theta, converted into a trade deck 3 years ago, wasn't built for subtlety. It was a warehouse of metal and silence, a vacuum-sealed bridge between desperation and transaction. Crates lined the walls, refuse from outposts too remote to matter, barter pieces in a system that measured value in silence and surrender. And there she was. The glass cell stood in the middle of the bay like a tombstone, tall, cruel, and sterile. Condensation fogged the edges, blurred the sharpness of the woman inside. Elin sat where she always did, back straight, eyes forward. But Dax could feel the tension in the air around her like static clinging to skin. 3 personnel stood nearby, clipboard in hand, datapads glowing. One of them, Lieutenant Marin from Logistics, glanced up at Dax and froze. "Commander Halloran?" she asked, voice tight. "You weren't cleared for this section." "I am now," he said calmly, holding up his tablet. The scavenger across from her, an Isarn mech runner with a breathing unit fused into his neck, snorted through its translator module. "This, the man who's late with the product?" Dax didn't answer. He walked straight to the center table and placed the datapad down with deliberate clarity. "Trade nullified under Federation Protocol 7/9. I've issued a wartime protection claim on the Thalrian unit. As of now, she is under my custody." For a moment, no one moved. Even the hum of the airlock seemed to hold its breath. Marin frowned. "That protocol hasn't been activated since—" "Doesn't matter," Dax cut in. "It's still active. You're claiming responsibility for her? For everything she's done?" Marin's voice sharpened, but her eyes darted nervously toward the cell. No one here really knew what Elin had done, only that she'd stopped doing it. Dax nodded once. "Fully and officially, I'll sign the assumption of behavioral risk." The scavenger hissed through his device, eyes flashing amber. "She was promised. And that promise is void," Dax said. "I'll make sure you're compensated." Marin looked between them, torn between her orders and the sudden emergence of a clause no one wanted to deal with. Dax didn't give her time to argue. He walked to the terminal and keyed in his credentials. The trade docket blinked out, line by line. Eland's code vanished from the manifest. The scavenger spat some guttural phrase and stormed toward the docking ramp, shoving a crate of parts into his hauler. He didn't look back. The hangar door closed behind him with a final, echoing thud. Silence returned. Dax turned toward the cell. "Open it," he said. Marin's eyes widened. "Sir, that's not recommended. I said open it." Reluctantly, she keyed in the release. The hissing of decompressing seals filled the air. A breath held too long finally let go. Steam vented from the edges. For a second, Eland didn't move, not a twitch. Then her eyes rose, slowly, with purpose, and she saw him. Dax stepped forward, stopping just outside the barrier line. He placed his sidearm on the floor, slid it toward the wall. His hands stayed visible. No sudden moves, no commands, just presence. "I'm not here to control you," he said. His voice was low, but the words carried. "I'm here because I chose to be." The glass lifted with a final hiss. The temperature changed instantly. He felt it, the bite of recirculated air, the faint dampness of thawed coolant. The cell wasn't just isolated. It was dead, lifeless by design. No humidity, no comfort, no smell of anything human. It was a coffin made sterile to erase even the idea of a person inside. And still, she had survived it. Eland didn't stand, but her eyes didn't drop either. Her gaze remained locked with his, calm and steady. Green skin faintly luminous in the soft white light. The faintest pulse beat at her throat. He knelt. Not a demand, not a gesture of pity, a choice. His knees hit the cold floor. He didn't flinch. "No one's going to hurt you," he said. For the first time in recorded logs, first time in years, Eland moved. Her right hand, slow as starlight, lifted from her knee and hovered in the air between them. Suspended, trembling, and then it touched his. A whisper of contact, skin against skin. Her fingers were cold, not lifeless, cold with endurance, with silence, with years of touch denied. Her breath caught. Not a word passed between them, but something ancient moved in the space. Connection. He didn't speak, didn't dare to. Words were too clumsy. This moment was quieter than language. Behind him, Marin stared in disbelief. The technicians recorded everything, motionless. Dax didn't care. Let the whole damn council watch if they wanted. Let the entire fleet review it. This was history being rewritten. She didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She chose contact. That alone made everything worth it. Dax rose slowly, not pulling away from her hand until the last possible moment. When he finally did, she looked down at her palm as though unsure it had happened. Then back up. The ghost of a breath passed her lips. Not a word, but almost. "I'm taking you out of here," he said, voice firm now. "You don't have to be behind glass anymore." Her eyes tracked his face, then the open doorway, then back to him. One heartbeat, two. Then she stood, legs shaky but steady, shoulders square, tall. Dax held out his hand again. And this time, she took it without hesitation. He turned to Marin. "Have medical sent to my quarters, nothing invasive, just diagnostic and baseline comfort scans." Marin blinked, stunned. "You're bringing her to your—" "She's not property," Dax said flatly. "She's under protection. She sleeps in a bed tonight." As they passed the threshold, the lights shifted again, flickering with the first flickers of artificial dawn. Eland didn't look back at the glass cell. Neither did Dax. And somewhere, far below the surface of her silence, something old and bruised and burning dared to begin again. The walk to Dax's quarters was quiet, but not peaceful. The corridor lights hummed faintly above them, casting long, sterile shadows across the floor. Eland moved beside him like someone walking underwater, slow, deliberate, as if every step threatened to wake something buried too deep to name. She didn't look around. Not at the sterile white walls, not at the officers who passed with quick glances, and definitely not at the surveillance drones nestled in ceiling recesses. Her eyes stayed forward, unreadable. But Dax noticed her flinch each time the air vents released a burst of cold pressure. Her feet were bare. He'd offered her thermal sandals at the checkpoint. She hadn't taken them. He wasn't sure if it was pride, defiance, or simply unfamiliarity with choice. Maybe all three. When they reached his quarters, the door slid open with a soft hiss. He gestured inside. "It's not much," he said, voice low, "but it's warm." The room lit automatically. Pale amber light filled the space. Small, efficient, functional. A cot, a desk, a folding chair, A wall unit stocked with sealed food packs and 2 spare blankets. The only hint of personality was a worn canvas duffel bag in the corner and a photo of a team of soldiers taped crookedly to the wall. 3 of them were still alive. Elin stepped in without hesitation. Her gaze swept the space like a scanner. Quick, precise. Dax watched her eyes rest on the cot, then the food unit. Her fingers twitched faintly at her sides, like she was counting invisible risks. "You can sit," he offered. "Or not. Whatever feels safe." She didn't respond, just stood near the wall like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to breathe. Dax turned to the food unit and keyed in a thermal meal. A protein and root starch blend, hot and filling. It wasn't gourmet, but it was real food, the kind you could taste with your hands shaking. When the tray clicked open, he set it gently on the desk and added a canister of purified water. Then he stepped away, letting space exist between them. "I'll be over there," he said, nodding toward the cot. "Eat as much or as little as you want. No one's watching." That last part was a lie. The room wasn't monitored, but he was watching, not with suspicion, with caution, with awareness, with something else he wasn't ready to name. Ellen moved, just a few steps. She didn't sit at the desk. She crouched beside it, as if expecting it to be pulled away. Then she reached for the spoon. Her hand trembled. She forced it still. The first bite was mechanical. The second rushed. By the third, she was breathing faster, not because of hunger, because of memory. She dropped the spoon after the fourth. Her hands gripped the sides of the tray so hard her knuckles paled to bone white. Dax looked away, not out of discomfort, out of respect. "I spent 6 weeks underground once," he said quietly. "Collapsed barracks. 4 of us made it. No heat, no sunlight. We drank meltwater and chewed rations made for airlifters. When we finally got out, someone handed me a bowl of soup. I dropped it. Hands wouldn't stop shaking." She didn't say anything, but the tray didn't move for a long moment. Then she picked the spoon back up, slower this time, 1 bite at a time. He moved to the cot and sat, stretching his legs, working the stiffness from his spine. Combat injuries never healed right in low gravity. The ache settled behind his knee like a silent reminder of the past. He didn't speak again until she was done. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally. "This wasn't a rescue. It's not a bargain. You were being discarded. I stopped that. That's all." Elin lifted her eyes. Her face was still unreadable, but something in her posture shifted, less rigid. Her shoulders didn't drop, but they loosened. "You don't know what I did," she said softly. "Number, I don't." He met her gaze. "Do you want me to?" She stared at him for a beat too long, then shook her head. "Then I won't ask. Not unless you offer." He reached over to the wall panel and dimmed the lights. The ambient glow from the viewport bled across the floor, soft and silver. Beyond it, the stars wheeled in silence. "Showers through there," he added, pointing to the lav unit tucked behind a folding screen. "Fresh towels in the cabinet. The sensor light turns on automatically." She hesitated this time. Her body didn't move, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Wariness. "You'll stay out?" "Of course," he said. "You'll hear the latch." She studied him, not like a soldier, like a strategist, evaluating weakness, trust, probability. Then finally she moved. He heard the door close. A moment later, water began to run. The sound struck him like something holy. Not the water itself, but what it meant. The last time she'd had access to hygiene was... He didn't want to think about it. He stood and began unfolding the spare blanket onto the floor. He could have offered her the cot again, but some things needed to be chosen, not given. When she emerged, her hair was damp, pulled back loosely, clinging to her green skin. She wore the loose thermals he'd left folded near the cabinet. They fit awkwardly, too human and cut. But she didn't complain. She didn't ask about the bed. She just sat on it, slowly, carefully. Her hands rested on her thighs. "You'll sleep on the floor?" she asked. "I've slept on worse." No sarcasm, no bravado, just fact. She nodded once. Not thanks. Acknowledgement. The silence that settled wasn't tense. It was suspended. "I knew you were watching," she said suddenly. Dax turned his head. "Yeah? You looked at me like I was still there. The others didn't." He let that sit. "You looked like someone who'd lost something too," she added, even quieter. He didn't reply. Couldn't. But he understood. She lay down. No pillow, just blanket. Her body curled inward like someone learning how to occupy space again. Minutes passed. Then, "Thank you." It was a whisper. Not a surrender. Not forgiveness, a beginning. Dax lay back on the mat, his arm folded beneath his head, listening to the hum of the heater and the faint breath of someone who hadn't spoken in 6 years. She was still alive, and now finally, maybe, she believed it too. The room was quiet, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was the kind of quiet that filled a space after something important had been said. Not loud, not showy, just real. Dax was already awake when Elin stirred. He hadn't slept much, 2 hours, maybe less. But he didn't feel tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. He'd spent the early part of the night watching the artificial starlight trace slow, lazy lines across the wall, listening, thinking, and waiting. When Elin sat up on the cot, she didn't speak. She folded the blanket carefully, smoothing its edges like she was handling something sacred. Then she looked at him. Dax sat cross-legged on the floor mat, a sealed water bottle resting in his palm. His hair was mussed, the faintest shadow of fatigue beneath his eyes, but he didn't look surprised to see her watching him. "Morning cycle," he said. "You feeling okay?" She nodded once. Her skin had more color today. Not much, but enough that the light didn't make her look like a hologram. Her white hair was dry now, hanging over one shoulder in loose strands. She looked alive, still cautious, but no longer haunted. She glanced around the room. Her eyes lingered on the corner where his duffel sat, the canvas aged and stained from field wear. Finally, her voice came, quiet but clear. "You were a ground commander." It wasn't a question. "I was," Dax replied. 15 years, off and on, recon, recovery, evacuation, sometimes retaliation. What happened? He exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. "My unit got stranded on a moon called Terra 9. Mid-siege, comms cut, 2-week delay before extraction. Supply lines collapsed. We lost half the team the first night." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way she held herself. Straighter, more alert, listening. Dax continued, his voice steady. "By the time help arrived, we were down to 6 people and 2 medkits. I carried a girl named Kara for 17 kilometers through irradiated fog. She didn't make it, but I remember how light she got by the end." Elin didn't look away. "That's when you left Field Command?" He nodded. "The brass offered a reassignment. I took it. Desk job, protocol advisory, tech research reviews, things with clearer outcomes." He gave a humorless smile. "No one bleeds out behind a console." She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Your eyes are too steady for someone who only writes reports." "I still remember what pain looks like," he said. "That doesn't fade." She studied him a moment longer, then glanced down at her hands. "My name isn't Elin." Dax blinked. "No?" "It was assigned when I arrived here. I think someone pulled it from a cultural file. It's close to my real name, but not quite right." He didn't press. He let her speak on her terms. She paused, her fingers curling slightly against her knees. "My people, the Thalrian, we don't speak names casually. A true name carries the weight of your past, your lineage, everything you've survived. That's a lot to carry." She gave a small, dry smile. "Exactly. So we carry it in silence until someone proves they can hold it with us." He met her gaze. "What would you like me to call you then?" "For now?" Her smile faded. "Elin is fine." He nodded, noted it, respected it. She shifted slightly, then stood and walked slowly to the viewport. The stars hung outside like dust on velvet. No planets, no movement. Just the endless reach of dark. "There was a child," she said quietly. "On our last outpost, a girl, maybe 6 cycles old. She was the daughter of a resistance doctor, smart, loud. She liked climbing things she shouldn't." Dax remained quiet, letting her speak. "One day she brought me a flower. It was half wilted, roots still clinging to dirt. She said I needed something alive in my hands. That night, the outpost was hit. Airlocks blown, fires everywhere. I carried her on my back through 5 kilometers of collapsed corridors." She touched the glass. Her fingers didn't leave prints. "They told me I let her die, that I failed." "Did you?" Dax asked softly. "I don't know," she whispered. "I remember the fire. I remember crawling. I don't remember her weight. I don't remember her last breath. Just the silence afterward." She turned from the glass and looked at him. "They called me a traitor, said I disobeyed orders, that I refused to retreat when command pulled back. I was declared defective, unfit, sentenced to neural isolation. For saving a child." For failing to die in formation, she said. Dax stood slowly. That's not a failure. That's the part that makes you human. I'm not human. Number. But that doesn't make you wrong. They stood in silence again. Not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time, everything that needed to be said had been. There were no secrets left in the room, only choices. Elin exhaled and nodded once. I would like to shower again. My skin feels heavy. He gestured toward the lav. Towels are folded on the left. Door locks from inside. She paused at the doorway. You asked me what I want to be called. He looked up. There was a name they gave me once, before the war, before the silence. She spoke it, a Thalrian name, soft vowels, a rolling syllable that didn't quite fit into any human register, but he heard it clearly. He wouldn't try to repeat it yet, not until she let him. He only said, thank you. And she disappeared behind the folding screen. When the water began to run, Dax finally sat down. His back ached, his thoughts were heavy. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone, and neither did she. The first time Aelin stepped into the open corridors of the station, she didn't look free. She looked aware, like a hunter in foreign territory. The hum of overhead lights, the quiet murmur of distant voices, even the clean antiseptic bite of recycled air, everything was new again, but not unfamiliar. She had cataloged this world from behind glass. Now she moved through it, finally visible and quietly dangerous. Dax walked beside her without touching. No one stared, not openly, but the way personnel stepped aside made it clear. Her presence meant something. To some, it meant risk. To others, rumor. To Dax, it meant a line had been crossed, and he had no intention of retreating from it. You don't have to come with me, he said as they neared the mess hall access. I know, she replied, but I need to be seen. He gave her a sidelong glance. You're not afraid? I'm measured. Fear implies reaction. This is choice. Dax nodded, quietly impressed. She was already adjusting faster than anyone could have predicted. Not blending in, she never would, but moving with intention. Still, every system had thresholds. And today someone had decided she'd passed one. They reached his quarters again just as the message hit his comm unit. Commander Halloran, immediate appearance requested. Council Deck 2. Priority red. He barely had time to glance at Elin before the second ping followed. Custodial rights under review. Possible override pending. They're trying to claw it back, he muttered. You knew they would, she said. Yes, just not this fast. She didn't stop him, didn't offer to come, just met his gaze and said, go. But don't argue for me. I'm not a favor to defend. Tell them what I am. What's that? Chosen. The council chamber was bright, cold, and unforgiving, designed to suppress, not to welcome. The 5 seated members wore expressions carved from stone. Solon, the highest ranking among them, sat centered like a blade waiting to be drawn. Dax entered without fanfare. His boots clicked once on the polished floor, then silence. Commander Halloran, Solon began, you've left the station in a difficult position. I acted within the bounds of Protocol 7/9, Dax said, which still holds jurisdiction over wartime non-combatant protections. Don't insult this room, another counselor snapped. You invoked a dead protocol to shield a known Thalrian officer. Former officer, Dax corrected. No active warrant, no tribunal. 6 years in isolation without cause. She refused interrogation. She refused communication. She is unstable. She's recovering, Dax said calmly. And she's not the only one with scars. Solon leaned forward. This isn't about one prisoner. It's about what it means if your claim is allowed to stand. You've politicized compassion. Number I gave it back a name. The silence that followed was taut and dangerous. She's not who you think she is, another voice said. Do you even know what she did before capture? Yes, Dax said. She told me herself. And you still brought her into your home? I did. Why? He looked each of them in the eye, slowly. Because she didn't stop being someone worth believing in just because the system gave up on her. Solon's face didn't change, but her fingers tapped once against the surface of the table. You're not the first to think sentiment is strategy, she said, and you won't be the first to regret it. I don't need them to like it, Dax said, just to understand I'm not backing down. She stared at him, then nodded to the aide at her left. A few keystrokes later, the formal judgment was registered. She remains under your custody. Your authorization stands. But understand this. If she steps out of line, even once, you fall with her. Then I suggest you hope I'm right, he said, because I don't intend to let either of us fall. Elin didn't ask how it went when he returned. She didn't have to. She was standing by the viewport, arms folded, watching the slow turn of stars with the stillness of someone bracing for impact. They gave us the rope, he said, unbuttoning his collar. Now they want to see if we hang ourselves with it. Her voice was quiet. Will we? Not unless you push me. I might, she said. He smiled at that. I know. A pause. Then softly, what did you tell them? The truth, that you're not a weapon, you're not a warning. You're a choice I made because no one else had the courage to look twice. She nodded once. I should tell you something then, so the risk is even. Dax sat down across from her, arms resting on his knees. Go ahead. She didn't sit, just shifted her weight slightly and looked him in the eye. I wasn't just a Thalrian officer. I was a cultural liaison. I was trained to infiltrate human stations, learn rhythms, language, behaviors, not to gather intel, to break empathy. Dax's brow furrowed. You were meant to make them stop caring. Yes, I helped write the silence protocols. I helped normalize the idea that prisoners don't speak, so no one needs to listen. And then you became one of them. Yes. He didn't speak for a moment, then simply, why are you telling me now? Because I need to know if you're helping me or trying to fix me. I'm not interested in fixing you, he said. I'm interested in who you became despite it. That stopped her. Not because she doubted it, but because he said it without hesitation. I don't know what that person is yet, she said. Then we'll find out together. Elin exhaled slowly, like the breath had been locked behind her ribs too long. Then softly, I think I'm afraid of healing. Why? Because if I heal, then I have to decide who I am without the war. Dax stood and crossed the room. He didn't reach for her, just stood close enough that she could if she wanted. You're not alone in that, he said. She looked up at him. For once, there was no guarded silence, no calculation, just openness. She touched his arm, not gently, but firmly, as if testing the realness of it. Her fingers slid down to his hand. He took it, slow and sure. I want to choose, she said, not just stay. Then do. She stepped in, her forehead brushing against his. He leaned into the contact, quiet and grounding, and then carefully her lips met his. The kiss was simple. No hunger, no fear. Just a breath exchanged between two people who had carried too much weight and finally found someone who didn't ask them to put it down, only to share it. When they parted, her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was alive, and that finally was enough. The first warning came as a flicker, barely more than a breath, across the status panel above Dax's console. Security anomaly, Deck 3, medical wing, no klaxons, no automated lockdown. Just that single flickering alert. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a test. Dax rose from his chair, already sliding the sidearm from its holster. He'd been waiting for something like this, waiting since the council gave him just enough rope to walk into a trap. Across the room, Elin stepped away from the viewport. What happened? Containment breach? Med deck? Another sabotage? Or a provocation? They're seeing how fast I respond. He paused, watching her fasten her coat. You don't have to come. I'm not here to be protected, she said, already lacing her boots. If they're watching, then let them see me move. They left the room together. Deck 3 smelled wrong, not burning, not blood, but off. The kind of artificial sweetness that came from sterilization foam failing to mask the metallic bite beneath. No lights flickered, no bodies, just silence. Dax scanned the entry panel outside the corridor. The fire suppression system had triggered, but there were no signs of an actual fire. Logs were fragmented. Surveillance data was missing. Deliberate loop, he muttered. Someone wiped the camera feeds. Elin moved ahead of him, ducking beneath a damaged conduit. Her eyes were sharper now, calculating angles, scanning corners. There was nothing hesitant about her anymore. They found the breach 4 rooms in, a diagnostic bay, unsecured. One panel was torn out, wires hanging like veins. A guard slumped against the far wall, groaning. Dax knelt and checked his pulse. Stable. Looks like they hit him with a kinetic pulse. Localized neural stun. Not random, Elin said from the doorway. This wasn't chaos. It was a message. Dax looked at her. To you? Number to us. He followed her gaze toward the wall. Someone had left a mark scratched into the metal, not a human symbol, Thalrian, roughly carved but intentional. She stepped closer, lips tightening. It's an old designation code. Resistance cells used it to identify command targets. We'd leave it near weak points, doors, exits, airlocks. So whoever did this knows who you were. Yes, or wants me to think they do. Could be a warning, could be an invitation. They're the same thing where I'm from. Dax tapped his comms. Medical breach confirmed. 1 officer down, no further casualties. Proceed with investigation, looping in Command Deck 5. He didn't wait for a response. They returned to quarters in silence, but not the same kind. This silence was electric, heavy with unspoken calculations. Elin leaned against the desk, arms crossed. She looked like she was trying to rebuild every shattered piece of herself with logic and posture alone. They're not just testing your authority, she said. They're trying to remind me who I used to be. Do you think it's working? She shook her head once. Number, but it's loud. Dax lowered himself into the chair across from her. Louder than what we've built? Elin paused, then surprised him by walking toward the kitchenette unit, retrieving 2 water packs from the small cooler. She tossed one to him without a word and sipped from her own. Her hand trembled only slightly. You asked me once what scared me, she said. He nodded. I think it's this. This? This? Quiet. This normal. This room. She exhaled. I spent 6 years with nothing but thoughts. Now I have air and light and food and you, and it feels like it's too much. It's not, he said. I know, but my nervous system doesn't. She sat across from him. Her legs brushed his beneath the table. It would be easier to fall back into survival mode, she said. Pick up the knife. Scan every doorway. Sleep in shifts. You still could. I won't. Dax leaned forward. Why? Because I remember now what it felt like to choose softness. And that's what they're trying to take back. He nodded slow. Then don't let them. She looked at him. Really looked. Not like a strategist scanning terrain or a fugitive watching for escape routes, but like someone trying to decide if this person was still safe to trust, even now. You've never asked me to be more, she said, but you treat me like I already am. I don't need you to prove anything. She smiled barely. That's exactly what makes me want to. The next morning she woke before he did, not in a panic, not to flinching shadows, just awake. The lights had barely begun their shift cycle when she sat up, slid quietly from the cot, and crossed to the small desk terminal. She stared at it for a long time before lifting her hand. She keyed in a message request. Destination, Engineering Deck 3, Greenhouse Module Request Queue. Subject, Requisition, Soil, Planting Beds, Microflora Samples, Human Tolerance Range. Reason, to replace something that didn't grow. She didn't send it yet. Behind her, Dax stirred. You're up early, he mumbled, voice rough with sleep. Couldn't sleep. You okay? She turned to face him, silhouetted in the soft light. I think I'm going to start a garden. He blinked once. Not what I expected. Exactly. She stepped closer, sitting on the edge of his cot. His hand found hers without asking. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she said, I don't want to be just a memory of what I survived. I want to be something else. What do you want to be? She didn't answer right away. Then softly, alive, fully, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Dax reached up, cupping her cheek. His palm was warm, grounding. She leaned into the touch, not tentative, certain. I'm here, she whispered. I know. Her lips found his again, not searching this time, but sure. The kiss was quiet, slow, and full of breath. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. I'm not what they made me. No, he said. You're what you decided to become. She closed her eyes. And right now, she said, I decide this. By the time the transfer order arrived, Elin had already submitted the greenhouse requisition. It wasn't much. Soil, light, seeds, basic sturdy earth flora, bred for enclosed stations. Her request didn't include flowers. That would come later. This was about roots, foundations, a signal of intent. She hadn't asked for permission. She'd simply signed the form as Elin, no title, no code, no clearance rank, just a name. The order came through Dax's console at 0500 hours. Standard clearance language, no salutes, no ceremony, but it was real. Subject ELIN, reclassified under Civilian Restoration Protocol 4B. Full autonomy granted. No restrictions, no surveillance. Case closed. Dax stared at the screen for a long time before shutting it off. For 6 years, she had been a shadow in someone else's system. Now she wasn't just free, she was unclaimed. When he told her, she didn't smile, not right away. She sat on the edge of the cot, legs tucked under her like folded paper. Still, processing, letting it settle. Then at last, "So that's it? You're not their prisoner anymore," Dax said. "They've officially let you go." Elin's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the mattress. "No more rules. None they can enforce." She tilted her head, her voice lower. "That's terrifying." He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. "It should be," he said. "Freedom isn't quiet, it's heavy. And what do I do with it now? Whatever you want." She let out a slow breath, somewhere between disbelief and a laugh. Then, "I think I want to stay." He looked over at her. "Here?" She nodded. "With you." She didn't mean just in quarters or for protection. She meant in the day-to-day, in the after, in the what now. Her voice didn't waver. "I don't want to be defined by escape," she said. "I want to be remembered for choosing to build something." "You already are." She shook her head softly. "Not yet." Then she stood and walked to the console. "This morning I got an auto confirmation. Soil delivery, 0700. You ever planted anything?" He smiled. "Just explosives." She gave him a look. "Not the same?" She didn't answer, just gestured for him to follow her. They stepped into the new greenhouse module just after shift change. The space had been cleared and reinforced. No one stopped them. No one asked why she was there. Sunlight simulated from high-band LED arrays filtered down through moisture-rich air. Condensation glimmered on the inner panels. 2 crates sat beside the far bench, tools, nutrient packs, recycled topsoil in sealed bags, and the first sprouting tray. Elin bent down and opened the lid. Inside were tiny curling roots, alive but fragile, dependent on her now. "Human plants," she said, brushing her fingers through the soil. "Nothing native to me." "They're stubborn," Dax said, "but they adapt." She didn't answer, but the metaphor hung between them. Elin reached for the first sample pouch, tore it open, and scattered the seed carefully across the soil. Her fingers were slow, deliberate, like she was building something she could finally believe in. When she finished, she stood and turned to him. "I've been thinking about my real name." He raised an eyebrow. "I thought you gave it to me already." "I gave you a sound," she said, "not a story." He waited. "I was named for a river on my birth world. It ran through 5 provinces, fed every village for 100 kilometers. My people believed it had memory, that when someone spoke its name, it listened." "What happened to it?" "Poisoned during the first strike of the rebellion. The river died. My name became a warning, a grief. And now?" She stepped closer. "Now it's yours to remember." He didn't touch her. Not yet, but his body leaned slightly, unconsciously, toward hers. "You want me to say it?" "Number, just know it." "I do." She breathed in, eyes half lowered. "I'm not afraid of being soft anymore," she said. "I'm just afraid it won't last." "It will," he said. "Because we'll protect it, the same way you protected others, even when it cost you." A pause, then voice nearly breaking. "I wasn't always good, Dax. You were always trying." She touched his chest, fingertips over his heart. "And you?" "I was never soft," he said. "But you make me want to be." She leaned in, slowly, carefully. Not because she feared rejection, but because she respected the weight of the moment. Their lips met. This time the kiss wasn't cautious. It was complete. Not perfect, but whole. When they parted, she didn't step back. Instead, she rested her head against his chest, eyes closed. "I want to learn what love feels like," she whispered. "Without pain. We'll start slow." She looked up. "No war?" "No war. Just roots." He nodded. "And light." Weeks passed.